It is an hour before dawn, somewhere in northern Europe, 20,000 years ago. The camp is coming apart. Hides are rolled, poles are pulled, and the fire is burning down. By mid-morning, this place will be empty. Every documentary you have ever seen shows somebody lighting that fire, sparks catching, faces glowing. Almost none show the harder problem. The family will walk all day through freezing air. Tonight, at a different spot, they will want fire again. Somebody has to bring it with them. And we barely know how. Start with why they would bother. Because in theory, you just make a new fire at the next camp. In practice, starting from cold in a cold place is brutal. Friction fire needs dry wood against dry wood, dry tinder, and still air. In a landscape of frost and damp moss, all three are things you have to have prepared in advance. There is real evidence that Ice Age people could strike sparks. In 2018, Andrew Sorensen, Emily Claude, and Marie Ceresi reported microscopic wear on Neanderthal hand axes from France, consistent with repeatedly striking lumps of pyrite. That is the strongest case anyone has made for Neanderthals making fire on demand. It is also, notably, a case that had to be argued from scratch marks. Not everyone accepts it. Dennis Sandgathe and Harold Dibble pushed the opposite view. Looking at French cave sites, they noticed that thick fire deposits appear in warmer periods and thin out in the coldest ones. Their reading? Neanderthals used fire heavily when lightning strikes and dry vegetation made it easy to get, and used it less when they most needed it. Fire you find, not fire you make. I think the truth is probably messier than either camp. But the debate matters here for one reason. If fire was ever hard to obtain, then keeping one alive was worth enormous effort. And keeping fire alive on the move does not mean carrying a flame. Nobody walks 8 hours holding a torch. What travels is not fire at all. It is a coal. An ember only needs 3 things: fuel that burns slowly, a little air, and insulation. Get the balance right, and it will smolder for hours without ever showing a flame. The best natural material for this in Europe grows on dead birch and beech. Fomus fomentarius, a hard, hoof-shaped bracket fungus. Its common name tells you everything. Tinder fungus. Cut out the inner layer, dry it, pound it soft, and you get a felt-like tissue that catches a spark instantly and then holds the heat, burning inward without spreading. Rotten punkwood does something similar. So does dried horse dung, dry moss, and the fibrous husk of a pine cone. All of it useless as firewood. All of it excellent as a carrier. Put that smoldering material in something that will not burn through. Birch bark lined with green leaves, a hollowed antler, clay packed into a basket, wet moss around the outside. That is the reconstruction. Here is the problem with it. Every single one of those materials rots. In 100,000 years of Ice Age Europe, we have no confirmed ember container at all. Which is why one body, found in the Alps in September 1991, does more work in this story than any excavation. 2 hikers found him at about 3,200 meters on the Hauslabjak, on the border between Austria and Italy. Ötzi, around 5,300 years old and carrying his whole kit. Among his things were 2 cylindrical birch bark containers, stitched with lime fiber. One of them held fresh maple leaves, and mixed in with the leaves were fragments of charcoal. The charcoal came from several different tree species. The leaves were green when they were picked. Konrad Spindler, who led the early work on him, read it as an ember carrier. The logic is neat. Green leaves are wet. Wet leaves insulate and will not ignite. Wrap a coal in them, seal it in bark, and you have something you can carry for hours. In his belt pouch, he also had pieces of true tinder fungus with traces of pyrite. So he had both systems, a way to make fire and a way to carry one. He also carried 2 lumps of birch polypore on a leather thong. Some researchers have suggested a medicinal use. That reading is genuinely contested and untested, so I will leave it there. Ötzi is not Ice Age. He is a Copper Age farmer walking a mountain pass thousands of years after the glaciers pulled back. But he shows the technique existed and left almost nothing behind. So what do we have from deeper time? Mostly hearths. And the hearths say something quieter, but interesting. At Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel, Neema Goren Inbar and colleagues found burnt flint and wood concentrated in tight clusters, dated to around 790,000 years ago. Nira Alperson Afil then showed something odder. Across many separate occupation layers, the burnt clusters keep reappearing in roughly the same places. Different generations, same fire spots. You see the same pattern much later at Abric Romani in Catalonia, where Neanderthal hearths stack on top of one another, dozens of them, in a rock shelter used again and again. This is where I want to be careful. Repeated hearths do not prove anyone carried fire between them. They prove that people came back, and that fire was central to where they sat. But it fits a world where fire is a fixed asset, tied to specific places, and where arriving somewhere already holding heat is worth planning around. To see the actual act, we have to leave archaeology and look at people who were watched doing it. In 1520, Magellan's crew sailed the channel at the tip of South America and saw fires burning along the shore at night. They called the place Tierra del Fuego, land of fire. Those fires were partly in canoes. Yagan and Coescar families kept a hearth of clay and sand amidships, burning while they paddled, in a climate of near constant rain. Think about that. People in one of the wettest, coldest inhabited places on Earth solved the problem by simply never letting the fire stop. Not even on the water. In Tasmania, European observers described people walking with slow-burning fire sticks, tapped and fed as they went. In the Andaman Islands, A.R. Radcliffe-Brown reported in 1922 that fires were kept perpetually alight and smoldering logs carried between camps. Across much of Australia, carrying the fire stick was ordinary, daily, often women's work, done while also carrying food, tools, and children. I want to be honest about what these examples are worth. They are not Ice Age Europe, and using them as a template has a bad history. What they do is remove the mystery. Carrying fire is not an exotic, fragile trick. It is a chore, and chores get assigned. Here is the position I will defend. We have almost no direct proof of how Ice Age fire was carried. What we have is an economic argument, and it is a strong one. Restarting from cold every evening after 20 kilometers of walking, in wind, with wet hands and no guarantee of dry tinder, is the worst possible time to need a skill to work perfectly. Keeping a coal alive costs one person a small amount of attention all day. Feed it shavings, check it, blow on it. That is the whole job. So probably more than one person carried one, for redundancy. Probably not the fastest walkers or the hunters. Possibly the old, or the young, or whoever was already walking steadily anyway. None of that is proven. It is inference from cost. But the failure state was not death. It was a miserable night. No cooked food, no light, wet clothes staying wet. And one more honest note. Living beside smoke every day is not harmless. Researchers studying smoke exposure in households that cook indoors have linked it to breathing problems. And it is reasonable to think ancient people paid something similar. We still do this. The pilot light in a boiler. The candle relit from another candle. The Olympic torch, carried by hand from Greece, protected by lanterns in case it dies. Somebody in your ancestry, thousands of times over, walked a full winter day with a coal against their body and did not let it go out. That was a job. It was probably boring. And every fire you have ever sat beside is, in a very literal sense, downstream of them doing it right.